Let's get right to it. Madam Secretary, do you believe that the federal government is legally or constitutionally permitted to punish a private entity for having a different viewpoint than the administration?
What do you mean by that?
Well, does the government have the power, or legally, or is it legal or constitutional for you, the Secretary, to punish a private entity for having a different viewpoint than the administration?
I don't know what you mean by punish. Can you be more specific?
Well, let's move on. Apparently, I don't want to get into this back and forth on this. Let me say, this poster here, you gave an interview on CNBC on May 28th. And discussing the cancellation of Harvard University's federal funding, grants, and contracts. And you said, and I quote, "Universities should continue to be able to do research as long as they're abiding by the laws and in sync, I think, with the administration and what I think the administration is trying to accomplish." So what you're saying, Harvard can have its funding and its international students back if and when it teaches what the Trump administration demands. These demands are included in this April 11th letter signed by the Department of Education and other agencies, and include a requirement that the government must be able to, quote unquote, audit the viewpoints of its student body, faculty, staff to ensure, quote unquote, viewpoint diversity. I ask unanimous consent to submit this letter for the record.
Without objection, it will be submitted.
And it says, I quote in the letter, quote, "Harvard must abolish all criteria, preferences, and practices through its admissions and hiring practices that function as ideological litmus tests," end quote. Now, Madam Secretary, what are the limits of this viewpoint diversity that the administration is trying to enforce? Under these demands, for example, would the Harvard government department be compelled to hire faculty that believe the 2020 election was stolen?
I believe that there are rights to freedom of speech, but on campuses and universities of colleges and universities across the country, freedom of speech should be allowed. There should be open debate. There should be different viewpoints.
But I'm not asking you a question about freedom of speech here, Madam Secretary. I'm asking you about the limits of viewpoint diversity cited in this letter. You demand that Harvard would be compelled to hire faculty. I mean, well, you're saying that there has to be viewpoint diversity. I'm just asking you, would the government department be compelled to hire faculty that believe the 2020 election was stolen? As an example of viewpoint diversity.
However, one of the things that Harvard Crimson, and by its
okay,
own,
I think you don't really have an answer, so I'm going to move on to other questions. Maybe we can clarify by other questions. Would viewpoint diversity mean, for example, Madam Secretary, reclaiming my time, Madam Secretary, Secretary, would the Harvard Medical School, who is looking to hire an immunologist, would that person need to adhere to HHS Secretary Kennedy's view on the efficacy of vaccines?
Listen, we all know that we should have our universities look at what all the programs are.
I don't think you really thought through this viewpoint diversity issue.
That you're trying to put forth is a false narrative.
Okay.
And the funding is a privilege.
Madam Secretary, reclaim my time. Does refusing to hire a Holocaust denier as a member of Harvard's history department faculty count as an ideological litmus test?
I believe that there should be diversity of viewpoints relative to teachings and opinions on campuses.
Well, what about this situation of Harvard's history department, and they're looking for another department member? Would being a Holocaust denier count?
Well, I do know that Harvard did replace its head of Middle Eastern Studies even before we looked at it, because they believed that they needed to make changes already.
Okay, can you explain to me how cutting funding to cutting funding to cancer research, which may save the lives of children, will help Jewish students on campus?
Well, we had to put some teeth in the anti-Semitism studies, so we used, that actually didn't come from the Department of Education, that came from HHS. So therefore, Harvard had indicated that it might even take from its endowment, which is $53 billion, some funds to continue that research, and I think that might have been a really good use for some of those funds.
Well, I think it's pretty clear you haven't really thought through this whole viewpoint.
Well, you
diversity.
wouldn't know because you haven't allowed me to answer my questions, but thank you.
Well, I think you were showing that you couldn't really answer the questions.
The gentleman's
No.
time has expired.
I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Groth.
You and this department and this administration for understanding that the power belongs to the parents, and we're going to start producing some of the smartest, wisest, and the most hopeful students in the history of mankind. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Now yield back.
Thank you, sir.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that in very many ways we've been talking around a lot of the issues with this administration. So to be honest and to be very clear, I want to say that this administration has undoubtedly revived the culture of racism we haven't seen since the Jim Crow era. They've made it clear that open attacks on black and brown and other marginalized communities is not just tolerated, but it's encouraged. So when they call for removing of equity and inclusion and diversity and accessibility from schools in favor of quote unquote traditional American values, it's indistinguishable from post-Civil War South advocating to rewrite history with the lost cause narrative to censor truths about slavery, or as they disappear students who write dissenting op-eds. It's reminiscent of the suppression of abolitionist newspapers. And this department's financial aid policies harken back to a time when higher education was reserved for affluent, well-connected, and predominantly white students. So I have some questions, about why this department is taking its leads from Jim Crow. Secretary McMahon, you've claimed that you want to drastically reduce the already very small federal role in education, and also that you will not cut Title I-A funding. That is still your position, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. I'd like a yes or no answer. Do you believe your April 3rd attempt to revoke Title I-A funding from states unless they signed a certification of compliance with your political viewpoint was consistent with giving states more control over education?
There's been no reduction in funding for Title I-A.
As of now. There has not been yet. But again,
And it is not going forward in the budget.
so you believe that okay. Yes or no, is Title I-A funding actually secure for every school district and state that currently receives it? Or is your goal to make Title I-A conditional on states refusing to provide students of color, LGBTQA students, students with disabilities, or other marginalized students opportunities to participate in diverse, inclusive, equitable, and accessible learning environments?
No, that's what I answered. I-A funding is intact.
Okay. So let's talk about so-called illegal DEI, as you all have called it, a phrase you've continually bring up, that I'm still unclear on, especially after 3 federal judges have preliminarily ruled that your illegal DEI guidance is likely unconstitutional and unenforceable, illegal, as it were. Secretary McMahon, during your confirmation hearing, you were asked by Senator Chris Murphy if an African-American history class violated the administration's position on diversity, equity, and inclusion. You said you'd like to look into it. You've been on the job for a few months now. Have you been able to look into it?
I do not think that African studies or Middle East studies or Chinese studies are part of DEI if they are taught as part of the total history package. So that if you're giving the facts on both sides, of course they're not DEI.
I don't know what both sides of African-American history would be.
Well, if African-American history is part of
Certainly,
history,
but what we recognize
it's being
throughout
taught
what we recognize throughout education is that a course is only 1 year or 1 semester. It would be impossible to teach African history and say European history at the same time. Do you not agree that it makes sense that there would be separate courses for these courses of study? It has happened throughout history. We're able to do it not just in history courses. We're able to do it with different types of literature courses or different types of music courses. One wouldn't learn about Baroque music and necessarily have to also learn about African drumming at the same time, right? We can separate those courses.
Yes, we can. And I think just as we teach U.S. history as a separate course.
Certainly. So you do not agree. So you do agree that African American cultures and African history should not be eliminated from courses, particularly AP African history.
Well, I think that African history can certainly be taught and not be considered a DEI course.
Oh, thank you. I have a few other examples that I would like your thoughts on, simple yes or no. If this is a legal DEI, an example, would you say that it would be an illegal DEI for a lesson plan on the Tulsa Race Massacre?
I'd have to get back to you on that.
Do you know what the Tulsa Race Massacre is?
I'd like to look into it more and get back to you on it.
Okay, so I look forward to that. How about the book Through My Eyes by Ruby Bridges, for instance?
I haven't read that.
Have you learned about Ruby Bridges?
If you have specific examples you'd like
That
to
was a
cite,
specific
I will-
example.
I'll be very happy.
It was
for
an
you-
incredibly
for
specific
you to
example.
submit
I named
those
a
in your
specific book.
questions, and I will look into it and get back to you on them.
Thank
I
you.
look
How
forward
about
to
a
answering them
school having a
directly.
voluntary celebration for Pride Month?
Well, I think that,
Voluntary.
well, let's make sure that in our schools.
yes or no?
that We're looking, no, it's not.
Okay. How about social studies standards that teach that President Biden won the 2020 election?
I think our studies should all be taught accurately.
Yes or no?
I think our studies should
No,
be
no,
taught
no.
accurately.
The question was, do you believe that social studies standards that teach that President Biden won the 2020 election is an illegal DEI? Yes or no?
I think I have said we should teach accurately. We should.
No,
be
you have
on all
not answered
sides.
the question.
Well, I am
I
answering
don't
the
understand
question.
why you're incapable
I'm
of
just
answering.
not giving you the answer you want. but
No,
I
I
am
want
answering
the answer,
question.
whatever your answer is.
I just gave you the answer.
No, the answer is yes or
No,
no.
the answer is I think
the
our
answer is
courses
yes or
should be
no.
taught accurately.
Gentlelady's
Thank you so
time
much. I
has
yield back.
expired. I now recognize the gentle.
Education system is absolutely failing them. This is especially true for low-income families and for folks in rural communities. But that's not because of too much federal oversight or the DEI policies like your administration claims. It's because in many states, like the state I represent in Arizona, we have woefully underfunded our public education system. Now, your administration wants to dismantle the Department of Education. I'm wondering if you can respond briefly. Do you believe there is a constitutional or operational path to eliminating the Department of Education? And if so, what is the timeline and process?
Well, certainly, in fact, when President Trump issued his executive order indicated for me to start dismantling the Department of Education lawfully. We both know, as does everyone in this room, that the Department of Education cannot be dismantled without the approval of Congress. And so that would be the path we would have to take. And I said in my confirmation hearing that I wanted to work with Congress so that we could arrive at a good plan to show how what the Department of Education is doing could be handled with other agencies and that we could see improvements for education throughout the country.
And what risk did you weigh for public schools and universities if federal education funding is gutted or devolved to the states?
Well, federal education wouldn't necessarily be gutted. I believe there would be more money to go to the states without the bureaucracy of the Department of Education. When you think about how many people there are at the department, and some of those services can be handled by other agencies, there would be less money taken out of the overall budget, more money to be available to go to the states.
So here's the thing, Madam Secretary, and why I strongly believe that you're wrong. One big risk I see right off the bat is that some states, again, the state I represent, Arizona, have an abysmal track record of managing education. Last year, Arizona was dead last in a national list of the best states for public education. We have some of the lowest teacher salaries, low test scores, and the highest student-to-teacher ratio in the country. After years of cutting funding for public education, Republicans in Arizona have tried to fix our education system with universal school vouchers. Secretary McMahon, do you support expanding school choice vouchers nationwide?
Well, one thing I would like to bring to your
This is a yes
attention,
or no.
which you may already know, is that the federal government only provides about 8 to 10% of the total education budget to states.
Do you support
So
expanding?
These are,
It's a yes or no question.
no,
Do
it
you support
isn't.
the
These are policies that are
Okay.
that are established by the states, and I
Reclaiming
think
my
that the
time,
states
Secretary, thank you. Do you
should adjust and provide their own education philosophy.
When it comes to vouchers, would you say that you support taxpayers subsidizing wealthy students' tuition at expense of private schools?
I think that, again, these are issues within the states, to look at.
It's a yes or
And
no.
No, there's a school
Do you
choice
support the
issue.
subsidizing for wealthy students?
There are issues within states that they should look at.
Okay, that sounds like a yes. Do you support those vouchers being used for things like expensive ski trips, $1,000 Lego sets, or pianos for individual families?
Of course not.
So I heard my colleague from the other side of the aisle just previously talking about how wonderful vouchers are. And I just want to share a couple articles, and I'm sure you all can't see from here, but these are all from the last couple of years in Arizona. It's titled, "Parents of Private Voucher Students Spent Over $1 Million of Public Money Buying Lego Sets." Another one, Arizona Empowerment Scholarships, what $304 million bought. Ranges from tuition to trampoline parks. A lot of waste, fraud, and abuse happening. And another analysis, more than half of ESA students come from high-income zip codes. So in Arizona, Secretary, this is exactly what's happening. 77% of those vouchers have gone to students in the wealthiest zip codes to fund their expensive private schools and luxury items, all while defunding public schools that the rest of our students attend. Does it sound to you like Arizona's voucher program is improving our education system?
It sounds like you've got an issue in Arizona that you should address with your governor and
And that's, no,
and
it's
with-
actually our state
and with your-
legislature
well,
that
then-
is
then do it
ballooning
with
the
your
state voucher
legislature
system.
and all of that.
So in
That's a state
Arizona,
issue.
the
That's a
issue
state
has been a
issue.
disaster, and this is exactly why a federal Department of Education is so vital. School vouchers have decimated our budget by $1 billion, again, Republican-controlled state legislature for, I think, 60-some years, costing taxpayers way more than simply raising school funding would have. So you have a clear test case in Arizona, which has failed miserably. I'm not sure why we would want to subject the rest of the country to the same problems.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Yields back, and I recognize the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Miller.
Well, good morning.